Hi everyone. In this video of Accelerated Chess Jargon, we're going to be looking at another chess opening, and this is the Pirc Defense. So without further ado, let's look at this opening. White will start off by playing the move e4, and black will play d6. White goes d4, and now black plays knight f6. White defends the pawn on e4 by playing knight c3, and we have g6 by black. Knight f3, bishop g7, and now h3 by white. The idea is that usually white will want to play the move bishop e3 and then go queen d2, get an attack towards the king side that way. But the problem that white faces quite often is the idea of knight g4 by black. And when black plays that move, it basically prevents the bishop from staying on that e3 square, meaning that white would have to develop his bishop out to f4 or g5, but the bishop is more prone to being attacked there. So h3 just covers the g4 square and makes sure that this knight on f6 can never really chase the bishop away. So black castles, bishop e3, and now black has a couple of moves to choose from. One move is b6, another move is a6, and the third move is c6. We're first going to be looking at the move c6. And here, white will play the move a4. And what a4 is trying to do is stop the move b5. And b5 always tries to get some sort of an attack towards the queen side, and black would always be very satisfied by getting that c6, b5, or a6, b5 pawn advance, where in the case that white is not going to be quite safe on the queen side as you might think. So a4 is just preventing the idea of b5, and here black has four moves to choose from. The first move is queen to c7, next is d5, and then there's a5, and then knight b to d7. We're first going to be looking at the move knight b d7, and if this move is played, then white will just develop his bishop out to e2, and black has yet again two moves to choose from, e5 and queen to c7. And if queen c7, just developing the queen out, is played, then white will castle, b6 by black, getting ready to fianchetto the bishop, rook e1, the bishop is fianchettoed, queen to d2, and we can see that the attack is trying to start. You can see that white is trying to play the move bishop h6 and get an attack towards the king side. Even though white has already castled king side himself, it's still okay to play the idea of bishop h6 and getting an attack that way. So a6 by black, trying to prepare the move b5, e5 by white, and this is an interesting pawn sacrifice that white chooses to go into. Black takes on e5, white takes on e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5. After queen takes e5, the main reason why e5 was played, to win this pawn on b6. The idea wasn't entirely to focus on the center and the king side. Now white has grabbed the pawn from the b6 square, and also if we look at the pawns on black's end, they're both isolated, and these are pawn islands, and it'll be a lot more easier for white to pick them off than if this b6 pawn was still there. Hence the reason why bishop b6 was played, not only isolating both of these pawns, but also weakening them severely. The ideas that might follow next might be something like a5 to cement this bishop on b6, maybe prevent either rook from coming to this d8 square, and then perhaps bringing this a1 rook to the d1 square, and then white's position will be very good. That was the move queen c7 though, and the other option is to play e5. And if e5 is played, then d takes e5, d takes e5, and now knight d2. And this knight d2 move is mainly aimed at trying to get the knight into the c4 square, which is a very good square, leading to this very, very weak d6 square. And that's the main focus that white is trying to put all of his attention towards. So black has two moves to choose from, queen e7 and queen c7. And if queen c7 is played, then white puts the knight on c4, black plays rook d8. Once this knight on d7 moves somewhere else, you have control over the d-file, but white is not allowing that knight to move. First, he plays queen d6, and now black is actually forced to trade queens. Queen takes d6. Knight takes d6, and now knight to f8. Unfortunately for black, you must part with the bishop pair because this bishop on c8 has nowhere to move where it can save itself from the knight capturing it. So knight f8, knight c8, rook dc8, and now castles queenside, and now knight e6. Black is developing his knight, but after bishop c4, white's two bishops definitely give a great amount of compensation. for the equal material, and white would definitely stand better because this is an open game rather than a closed game. So that was the move queen to c7. Now another move to think about would be queen e7, just developing the queen. It's really a similar idea. Knight goes to c4, knight goes to e8, defending the d6 square. And now white has two moves, castles and h4. If h4 is played, then knight c5, trying to reroute the knight to the e6 square. h5 by white, getting an attack ready. Knight e6, we have a trade of pawns on the g6 square. Queen to d2, and we can see that the idea of bringing this bishop to h6 is a very strong one. The line could continue knight to d4, bishop to h6, and now f6, and now white just castles queenside, and white should definitely stand better. His attack has started a lot quicker compared to black, and white's pieces are more actively placed on black's kingside than black's pieces are on white's queenside. The other move to think about is just castling as white, and this would allow knight c5, queen d2. The same idea, the knight goes to c5 and then to e6, and then also to the d4 square. And after white plays knight e2, the idea that white has in general is just to capture the knight with the knight on e2, and then perhaps bring this bishop to f4, and maybe after a solidification with the move f3, white's pieces are soon going to find their way into black's kingside. So that was the move knight bd7. Another option to choose from is actually the move a5, and if this move is played, then white develops with bishop e2, black plays knight a6, white castles, knight b4, and now knight d2. Yet again trying to find a way for this knight to go to the c4 square. d5 by black, e5 by white, and now knight e8. And here, this knight on b4 can always be a nuisance for white, so white plays the move knight a2, trying to trade this knight on b4 off for the a2 knight. The knights are exchanged, and after f6 and f4, white's position is definitely a lot more solid. If you think about a move like f takes e5 by black, then white can always play f takes e5, and, well, the rooks will be traded off, and white gets more control over the f-file than black does. And this knight on e8, even though it's supposed to go somewhere else, for the moment, it's not really doing much on its e8 square, and maybe it could try to find the same outpost as the previous knight did, but it's in general a favorable position for white. So that was the move a5. The other move that can be played is d5, and theory favors this move among other moves. So white plays e5, knight e4 by black. We have a trade of knights on e4, knight g5, and now c5. And you cannot defend the e4 pawn with bishop f5 because you just allowed g4 and the bishop gets kicked back. And you cannot defend it with f5 because after e takes f6 en passant, or even e6 by white, black's position is really cramped and it's really hard to find a move for black. So that is why black plays c5, and white could capture on e4. This would give white perhaps a significant advantage, but after something like c takes d4, queen takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop takes d4, volunteeringly going into all of these exchanges, black gets knight c6 in, and you can trade this bishop on g7, this very bad bishop on g7 off for this excellent bishop on d4, and the material would then be equal, and white would definitely get a very dull position with no counterplay whatsoever. So yes, you could technically capture the pawn on e4, but it wouldn't really favor you as much as in the variation that occurs. So white plays c3, black plays queen d5, defending the e4 pawn, and now dc5. Black takes on e5, just winning this pawn back, bishop c4, and now knight to d7 is one move, and so is knight to c6. If knight c6 is played, then white just plays queen d5 and targets the f7 pawn. And if black plays knight to d7, then white is always happy to play queen b3, targeting the f7 pawn again, e6, and here white has a very nice combination that I encourage you to find. Okay, the idea is just to play bishop takes e6, and after f takes e6, knight takes e6. And obviously now if you play this rook anywhere, let's say you move it to e8, then white is just happy by playing this move knight takes g7 check, and now you cannot capture this knight on g7 because you lose the queen with bishop d4, but if you move the king somewhere like f8, then after knight takes e8, queen takes e8, black is down in exchange, and black doesn't have any compensation whatsoever. So rook to e8 doesn't work. Instead, black must actually part with some material. Knight f6 must be played, and now knight c7 check. King h8, and now knight takes a8. Even though it's hard to comprehend this position at first, you might be thinking that white has one material, but black can just play queen b8, and this knight is lost now. And that is true, but after something like queenside castle by white, queen takes a8 by black, the queen is on the wrong side, and after something like bishop f4, you could say that this queen is somewhat trapped. And after this bishop goes to d6, you could also say that white has improved the position of his pieces, and black is not really doing much. Black does have a knight and a bishop for the rook on d1, but it's not enough compensation considering that those pieces aren't really that active. So that is why, even though after knight takes a8, you would technically lose the material back, white's activity would be more compensation than black being up material. So the final move is actually just to play queen c7, and now white will play bishop to e2, developing. e5, we have a trade on e5, the bishop goes to c4, rook d8 attacking the queen, and after queen to e2, white should be okay in this position. White's definitely not going to castle queenside with this rook on d8. More or less, white's going to castle kingside and try to find a way to attack that way, and this is just going to be a very good game for white. So that was the move c6. Now you could also try this move a6, and this is the second sideline, and after this a4 by white, b6 by black, and now e5. Somewhat of a similar idea, and you'll see that in this opening it just matters on whoever pushes e5 first, and whoever does will usually either find a way to equalize or get a very nice position very quickly. So here black has two moves. One of them is just to take the pawn, and the other one is to retreat the knight. And we're first going to be looking at capturing the pawn. If this move is played, then white captures on e5, knight fd7, and now e6 by white. Trying to find a way to break black's pawn structure up somehow. And after e6 is played, if you don't capture the pawn on e6, or if you just move the knight somewhere else, then after e takes f7 check, black's position isn't really in the best shape, and that is why black captures on e6, bishop c4, and here black plays knight e5. White takes, and interestingly, black does not actually trade queens. If black decides to play queen takes d1 check, rook takes d1, and now bishop takes e5, then white is okay with just playing a calm move like h4, getting ready for an attack. White isn't really too concerned about the material here, because this position is already way better for white. The attack is getting ready. Even though white does not have a queen, white's attack is going to start, and black, even though the queens are off the board, isn't exactly safe from the attack. So queen takes d1, even though it could be played, is not really the best idea. Instead, bishop takes e5, and white plays queen g4. The threat is to attack the e6 pawn, and also to perhaps bring this rook over to the d file, and from there, white's position would definitely improve significantly. The other option is to play knight fd7 as black, and after this move is played, white is just going to play the move e6, a similar idea, fe6, bishop c4, knight f6, and now d5. And here, black plays c6. You might be wondering why not just close the position up with e5, because then there won't really be much attack that white gets. Well, after this, white is just going to shift his attention over to this bishop on g7 and this castled king here. Not really on the center, but more of the king side, and get ready for an attack. White's going to castle queen side, and black is in a very terrible shape of attacking himself. So e5 isn't really the best. Instead, c6 by black, and now knight g5. And you might be wondering, why doesn't white just capture on e6? And it's because, first of all, you've undoubled black's pawns, but also, after black plays d5, white must move his bishop back, and now after black captures on e6, the position is consolidated, and now black's pawn structure is a lot better than it was before, and black is up material again, so this would definitely favor black. over white. So knight g5. D takes c6 runs into a similar problem, so knight g5. E takes d5 is one move here, and the other is just to push h6. If h6 is played, then knight takes e6, bishop takes e6, d takes e6, and now d5. Similar idea, just trying to play the move queen to d6 or queen to c8 to win this e6 pawn. Bishop to e2, and now queen to d6. And you might be wondering, why don't you just capture on b6, because that would just win material back. The reason is because after queen takes e6, it doesn't matter if the material is equal now. Black has managed to undouble his pawns. He's able to consolidate with something like knight d7, c5, and white would definitely have to go on the defense in that scenario. So bishop b6 is not an option. Instead, white plays queen d3, attacking the g6 pawn. King h7, h4, and now h5 by black. And after h5 is played, white finds a hook or a target that he can attack. g4, and now after knight takes g4, bishop takes g4, h takes g4, white plays h5. And the attack towards the king is a very, very crucial part of this entire opening, and how black has to defend very carefully and take serious precautions in this opening. So after h5 is played, the attack is starting for white, and black must be very careful when he plays this position. The other move, instead of playing this move h6, is actually just to take on d5. And if this move is played, white actually will just capture on d5 with the knight. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d5 check. C takes d5 would transpose into a similar variation. So knight takes d5, bishop d5 check, king h8. Obviously, if you capture on d5 with the pawn, then after queen takes d5, king moves, then just queen takes a8, and white is better in this variation. So instead, king to h8, but now knight f7 check. This forces a trade of rook for knight, so black must give up the exchange. And here black plays e6. And black is hoping that he will win this bishop on f7, because it's cut off from the rest of white's army, and it doesn't have a good way of escaping. So what will white play? White will play h4. And after rook a7, white plays h5. Now, why doesn't black just capture the bishop here? Well, if black does this, then after rook captures on f7, h takes g6. Let's say rook to f5 here. There's ideas like g4, there's ideas like rook h7 check, king g8, and now queen to g4. And the position would definitely give white a good amount of attacking chances. And for black, black, even though he's up material, would have to go on the defensive end, and this would be a very tough thing for black. Black hasn't even developed these two pieces, and white should definitely get an attack as soon as possible. So rook f7 isn't an option, instead g5, and here bishop g6 by white. And after bishop g6, if you capture this bishop on g6, and after h takes g6 check, king g8, white should just play c3 and then continue his attack with queen h5. I say play c3 first because you should avoid the idea of bishop takes b2 and then bishop c3 check as white. You need to prevent that on black's end, so just c3 and then queen h5 and the attack starts. Now that was the move a6, but there's still one more move that black can play, and that is the move b6. And if b6 is played, then white plays e5, and here black has two moves, d takes e5 and knight fd7. And if knight fd7 is played, then e6, f takes e6, and h4. Again, white is not really too concerned about the material in all of these variations, and instead, the attack is more important. So knight f6, trying to prevent the move h5, but that is exactly what white plays. h5, and after knight takes h5, bishop d3. The idea that white has is to just play the knight to g5, and maybe in the future get an exchange sacrifice with the move rook takes h5. White in that case would get a very strong attack, and black would have to play a very strong defense. And that is essentially impossible for black in the scenario where white would sacrifice his exchange, because black has no way to defend the crippled position where his pawns are doubled, and his king is completely exposed, and it's very hard to defend in a scenario like that. So the other option is to play d takes e5, but this would allow d takes e5, and here you could capture on d1 with queen takes d1, but after rook takes d1 by white, knight fd7, there is knight d5, and there's a fork towards c7 and e7. And this position is completely lost for black because white can win some material, and black has really no recourse against it. So instead, knight fd7, queen d5 by white, c6 by black, and now queen e4. Defending the e5 pawn, black plays queen c7, and now white castles queenside. And you might be wondering here, why doesn't white just play the move e6? And it's actually because after e6 is played, black has this f5 move, and now after f5, there's just nothing. Once the queen moves, say, to c4, then after knight e5 is played, knight takes e5, queen takes e5. This e6 pawn is not only lost, but it's lost without any counterplay from white's end. So instead, we have castles queenside, sacrificing the pawn, but after bishop f4, f6, a trade of knights, bishop e3, bishop f5, black develops and attacks the queen, check on c4, king h8, g4, bishop c8, and after bishop g2, this is the end of the variation, and white definitely gets a lot of attack. Black, even though he's up material, all of his pieces are stuck on the back rank, other than the queen and bishop, and this isn't really going to look well for black. White's bishop on g2 is literally cutting the board in half, and black has no way to defend against all of this. So that is why after bishop g2 is played, white is way better in this variation, and black must step up his game if he wants to try equalizing. So that is the end of the variation, and I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned for more chess.